Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis blog. There's a lot of videos out there about how to acquire and how to get clients. This video is about the opposite. It's about when to fire a client or when to terminate a client relationship. I think this is an extremely important topic that often doesn't get covered. So I'd like to share my experiences and my conclusions, my current conclusions, I should say, and how I go about it. Of course, the title of the video shouldn't really be when to terminate a client relationship or when to fire a client. It should be when I fire a client or terminate a relationship. So you, of course, don't have to adopt my ideas or take them for granted. These are just my observations, and hopefully they will be of some use. Let me start by this. In the city that I live, a few years ago, someone attempted to run a restaurant. And what they would do was that they called the restaurant a family restaurant. And in the restaurant, you had like really nice, you had some really nice, decorative stuff on the tables that kind of gave the idea that this was kind of a high-end place. But then simultaneously you had plastic chairs, and that wasn't quite congruent. It was supposed to be a family restaurant that kind of gave a little bit of a high-end type vibe, but at the same time you could buy and eat hot dogs and kebabs over the counter. And also, of course, you had you had a lot of like country music playing, like Western country music, and then you had this Pakistani type guy with like a pajamas as a DJ, playing the music. And I don't know whether these guys were seriously attempting to actually run a restaurant, or whether it was some sort of scheme to go bankrupt and collect some sort of money. If it was the latter, I think it was just a almost secure recipe to go bankrupt, because in a sense they attempted to be everything for everyone, and as a result they ended up being nothing to no one. Meaning, if people who want to go on a family dinner most likely don't want to go to a place where people eat kebabs and hot dogs over the counter. And the people who want to eat a hot dog or a kebab over the counter probably don't want to go to a family restaurant. And I don't know how accurate these stereotypes are, but I would assume that family restaurant, Western country music, that perhaps a lot of the people who listen to that type of music, a Pakistani guy in a pajamas who's like a DJ playing that music, probably not the best fit. Now, how does this relate to agents of change, psychotherapists, coaches, NLP practitioners, hypnotherapists? Well, I notice that serious professions have a tendency to be pretty specific about who they are, what they do, who their customers are, what they specialize in. In the helping professions, there's very often this notion that, I'm going to be everything for everyone. I work with all clients for all issues. We make no distinctions whatsoever. And while the intent may be good, I think the consequences in real time is that often you end up being a version of that very restaurant that ended up going bankrupt. So to kind of start this off, before we talk about when I terminate a client or fire someone or end the session, I think it's useful to kind of backtrack a little bit and ask yourself the question, how do I select clients to begin with? between the years of 1998 and 2006, I ran a practice where I looked for so-called impossible clients, people who hadn't succeeded in traditional forms of therapy, and I would work with everyone and everything with a no change, no pay guarantee. And as I've often joked about in seminars, it's a great way to go broke. It's also a great way to learn because you have skin in the game, you have soul in the game. You're kind of forced to get pretty smart pretty fast. But around 2006, I kind of burnt out a little bit doing this. I was exhausted. I was depleted. It stopped being fun. And I sat down with a piece of paper and I asked myself the question, what am I no longer willing to spend my time and energy engaging in? Like who, what type of clients, under what premises am I just no longer willing to engage with? And then on the other end of the page, I asked the question, when do I feel energized? Not who is making me feel energized, because that's not, but when do I feel that I kind of come alive, that I have that spark, that playfulness, that curiosity, that makes this my life's passion? And as I started to engage with these questions, and I did some client follow-up, for me the patterns became really, really clear. So one thing I decided was that I would never again work with someone who wasn't there on their own behalf, meaning I would never again let a parent or a partner buy a session as a gift. This included former clients I had worked with who wanted me to work their magic with a family member. I discovered that this was not a good idea. I decided that if I on the phone sense the vibe of someone looking for a savior or for someone to kind of save them, and I couldn't help them clarify that that's not what I'm doing, I would let them go. I became extremely clear on the frame that this is not surgery. This is a do-with process. My competencies, my skills matter, but what you bring to the table, your capacities for concentration, your willingness to engage, your curiosity, these sorts of things, your commitment, these things matter a lot too. And the relationship factors between us matters. And out of that, something is going to emerge. And we're both active participants in that. If I couldn't get someone to understand that or agree with that, I no longer accept them as a client, and that made my life a lot easier. So, for example, one test for me, and of course it's really important to give people a chance, because a lot of people think, especially if they've been to many psychologists or psychiatrists, they think that their role is to be a victim, that their role is to tell their story and essentially whine and complain, and that your job is to sit back and listen and to be empathetic, and as a result of that, some magical insight is going to emerge. This is a great strategy for collecting insurance and for keeping people in therapy year after year after year with very little change while you can collect money from the state. It's a great strategy for that. But for ethical purposes, for actually helping someone and doing work that's fulfilling, it sucks. So if someone does that on the phone, I'll explain to them how I work, and that it's not about that. It's about helping them discover the processes, help them discover how they kind of manifest their own experience, helping them understand their own experience in a different way, and that we're going to be doing thought experiments, and that they're going to be an active participant, and that I'm not interested in the story. If people accept that, fine. But you'll notice with some people that you can attempt to do that, but they just want to go back and tell their story again and again and again and again. And if people do that, I have a tendency not to accept them as clients. There's an interesting pattern to notice here too, and that is that the people who perhaps call you late at night and they're crying and they're like, oh, the only thing I'm interested in is getting relief from this, and they tell their story, and as soon as you ask questions that are a bit solution-oriented or action-oriented and you want to get them productive, they just want to go back and they want to tell their story. These folks are not for me, so to speak. What I also discovered was that people who were part of the psychiatric establishment, whether they had a diagnosis or whether they got welfare benefits, I've sometimes broken this principle. But I've noticed that the people who really believe in the whole mental illness frame and they're identified with their diagnosis and stuff like this, this can be tough. The clients I've struck out with the most, I think, or have had the most adversarial relationships with have been female, older psychiatric nurses who come as clients. They're just not a good match for me, because they usually come here with an expert attitude and they've bought into the psychiatric framework. But they're basically clueless and incompetent, and that combination of having an expert attitude and being completely incompetent and having their identity, kind of tangled up in competing frameworks is a rough one. I don't work with people who are on psychiatric drugs. The meta studies have come back quite a long time ago. I would like to encourage anyone to read The Myth of the Chemical Cure by Joanna Moncrief, and also The Anatomy of an Epidemic and Psychiatry Under the Influence by Robert Whittaker. So you can actually see the documentation of this type of stuff. No matter which psychiatric drug you're talking about, the long-term effects of being on them are worse than not being on them. So and these sorts of drugs very often contribute to the exact sort of experiences and symptoms that they're supposed to help against. And if you have a client who kills themselves or does something erratic or something like that, and you have been part of the mix, it's your ass on the line, especially if you're not a medical doctor. You're the perceived charlatan in the public eye. You don't have status with academics and the mainstream media, and they're going to look for a scapegoat, and it's going to be you. And especially in these days of a so strong therapeutic state, the bureaucratic welfare state, where there's so many rules and regulations, where there's such a bed shared between lobbyists from the psychiatric guild associations and pharmaceutical industry and government, that the entire healthcare systems and welfare systems are mostly designed to protect and enhance the power of these groups. And anyone who really claims otherwise is either uneducated or a useful idiot on the topic. So that's kind of risky too. And I also discovered that people who are part of groups like anxiety groups, phobia groups, this type of stuff, nasty stuff. None of the people there have a solution, obviously. And what very often happens is that people end up basing their identity and their social network on maintaining an issue that they're kind of paying you to help them solve it. It's a massive incongruency. And I've noticed so many times over the years, I've said to people, look, I'll work with you when you're no longer part of the group. And I've had so many people quit those types of groups. And then before they even see me, often spontaneously make a lot of changes. So you want to be clear with yourself and the people around you what you do, what you don't do, and on what premises. That's kind of the hallmark of being a professional. Yeah, of course, some people will be pissed off and provoked, but if they're not, you're not really doing anything. You're not really saying anything. So that really helps if you can get clear on that. Now, in terms of terminating an actual session, with smokers, for example, I usually give them some homework assignments before they come for the first session. And I tell them, look, I only work with people if they actually do this 100%. If they haven't done it 100%, I send them home, without exception. And they either get pissed off and they don't come back, or they ask for a new chance. And if they ask for a new chance, I give it to them. And they usually come back and they've made changes, they're committed, they're in the flow. So you want to have some standards. You want to have some healthy boundaries. Because if you tell a client, I'm only going to see you if you actually do this, and the client says, yes, I'll do it, and they don't do it, they've broken their promise. If you then also see them, you've broken your promise. You're two liars, essentially, attempting to create change. But none of you are trustworthy in that particular moment. So you want to be the trustworthy one. You want to be the responsible one. You want to be the one with standards, with principles, with healthy boundaries. This is extremely, extremely relevant. Now, in terms of an actual session, I would say, okay, listen to your intuition. Listen to your gut. If someone or something just feels wrong to you, I didn't say obey it. I said listen to it. There's a guy, a late psychologist by the name of Nathaniel Branden, who had this conversation once with a child psychologist. I can't quite remember his name, but the child psychologist said that, looking back, I realized that every time in my life I've screwed up. He probably didn't say screw up, but something to that effect. I ignored something that I felt. And this is, I think, a crucial distinction, because he didn't say I ignored my feelings, because we often have feelings that are based in highly misguided thinking. But the trick is that very often when we do things that we later kind of look back on and go, we've kind of often ignored something that we've felt. So. But here's also the thing, Milton Erickson used to say, trust your gut. And that's great if you're Milton Erickson and you have a lot of experience seeing clients. So paradoxically, if you want to develop a really strong gut or really strong intuition, you want to violate your own intuitions from time to time and then get feedback quickly and adapt, because that's the only way you can really reality test it and improve upon it. It's a bit like, the mistake that very often is made in a court system and correctional, services, where you take, for example, clinician who may or may not be skilled. Most of them aren't very skilled, but may or may not be skilled in working with clients in a change work context, right? And then you put them in a prison system and you kind of go, well, is that guy actually a sexual molester or rapist, or does he just seem like one? Will that person reoffend? Now, in this context, their intuitions are not better than the intuitions of the average Joe. They're in those systems because they've been able to con everybody into kind of people believe in authority, you know, that they have these skills in detecting who's lying and to predict behaviors and stuff like that. They don't have these capacities. But now ask yourself, why would they have those capacities? Because if you're going to get really good at detecting whether someone, for example, is a rapist or child molester, or if he or she just looks like or seems like a rapist or child molester, then you have to be in a context where you make the decisions and then pretty quickly get feedback on whether your decision was correct or not. And you get the chance to see where you kind of screwed up. If you have access to such a learning environment, then you'll probably develop strong intuitions. This is also why judges, even people with decades on the bench, are not any better than average Joe in detecting this deception. Most people, they're actually somewhat worse, the really experienced ones. And you got to ask yourself, why would they be? Well, people say they have a lot of experience. Well, yeah, they have a lot of experience doing what? Listening to stories. But if you're a judge and you sentence someone and the decision is wrong, the chances of you ever finding that out is extremely slim. And the chances of finding out where you went wrong, the patterns you saw that weren't really there, you don't have that learning environment. It's not like the engineer where the bridge falls down and you go kind of, what the hell happened here? It's not that. So you can make those decisions for decades, but unless you have that feedback system, there's no reason to assume that your gut feelings are going to be a good guide really to anything. Now what happens, of course, is that their confidence grows over the years because they have the education, they have the status, they have the power, people treat them as if they're smart and wise, and they also trust the system, you know, and they trust their colleagues, and they have heard it all before, so they don't really listen anymore. They just listen alongside well-known tracks, which is why, paradoxically, a new judge or jury members or people who have less experience can sometimes be better at detecting that, something here is wrong, because they're not quite listening along so well-established tracks. So if you want a good intuition, violate it from time to time. You know, test it, violate it, get the feedback. That's a really good tip that I have for you. I used to, and still, you know, if I have people who seem kind of very passive, not engaged, you know, teenagers where it seems like you have to, like, you know, pull their teeth, I have a tendency to send them home. I was kind of surprised when I got to know Felix Economakis and saw his workshop, because I saw him succeed with some folks that I would have sent home. And that was kind of useful information to me to kind of go, you know, there's someone out there kind of succeeding with someone who I would have sent home. So this is one reason why I urge you to not necessarily accept my list of criteria, but you should have some criteria, and you should experiment a bit. Now, if one thing though that I've noticed is that if someone's hostile, I mean, one thing is if someone's, you know, angry at something that you're saying, or they're irritated, or they have objections, and they have that sort of personality. For me, no problem whatsoever. No problem if they're skeptical, no problem if they get pissed off at something, you know, then we're kind of engaged. But if a client is hostile, you know, just overall hostile and just negatively inclined and won't engage, if I see facial expressions of disgust and I see contempt repeatedly, then I will end the session. For me, over time, I've noticed that, you see, if you have anger, you're on a level playing field. I've had clients where the first session has been a catastrophe. They've been offended, they've been angry, they've come back. I've still been able to reach them. We've had really, really productive, good work. So that's fine. But if you get contempt, here's a facial expression of contempt. If you see these sorts of things and disgust like this, and you know, hostility, then you're no longer in the mix. The client does no longer view you as an equal. They're you know, it's a bottom down type of relationship. And if they're there, you know, like from the get-go, then my best tip for you is to just cut the whole thing short. That's a really good. I've had in 20 years. I've been extremely straight. There's no Me Too skeletons in my closet, to put it that way. I've had 2 female clients, 2 in 22 years, say, I don't feel comfortable around you. And you know, as I said to, you know, as I said to both of them, you know, my intent is completely pure and straightforward. So if you have that experience, it has nothing to do with me. And they were both still uncertain, so I just sent them home. And you know, if you see clients long enough, you know, who knows what someone may make up, or what someone may hear, or may interpret, or may think that you said or done. If someone has serious trust issues, and you know for a fact that, you know, your ducks are in order, so to speak, that's probably nothing to engage with, especially if you're in private practice and you're not protected, so to speak. So I hope, and as soon as the person, you know, gets passive with me and is no longer an active participant in the process, I have a tendency to let them go. I never adopt the role of a parent or something like that. So I hope this was useful. If you have any comments or questions, you know, feel free to post them wherever you found the video, on my YouTube channel or on Facebook, social media. Till next time, have a good one.